Welcome to the annual statewide Child Abuse Prevention Planning Convening, hosted by California Department of Social Services, Child Welfare Directors Association, Child and Family Enrichment Cabinet, the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission, the California Probation Department, and the Child and Family Policy Institute of California, as well as Strategies Technical Assistance. So this is just a bit about our day today. We are going to hear a welcome by California Department of Social Services. We will be learning more about the overview of prevention planning. We will have a short break and a keynote presentation by Alex Morales. We will also hear from the San Diego County Prevention Planning team, and then we will do a closing. Before we begin, we want to know who's in the room. So we ask that you place your name, your title, your organization, and your county in the chat. And my name is Lydia Marquez. I'm a Senior Technical Assistant Specialist with Strategies TA, and I am joining you today from Orange County. So it looks like we have the Southern region represented at 33% of our participants today, Northern at 24%, Bay Area at 19%, Mountain Valley at 11%, and Central Valley at 14%. So we have some really great representation here today. All right, and now we want to know, what is your affiliation? So we'll launch that poll as well. A lot of child welfare folks here to the board of different community-based organizations, probation, mental health. It looks like we have some folks from First Five here as well. So welcome everyone. We're really happy to have everyone, and we do appreciate you spending your morning with us. I really have the honor to introduce Cheryl Treadwell, who is the branch chief of the Safety Prevention and Early Intervention branch of the California Department of Social Services. So I will go ahead and hand this over to Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Good morning, everyone. Glad to have you here. Excited about the day. I'm hoping that you will walk away with some beginning tools and things that you need to move forward with this prevention work. I just want to thank all of the folks in the room. The day is meant to sort of orient the participants on the different pieces of what we've been doing around the FFPSA, Families First Prevention Act, the state's program, the block grant, comprehensive prevention planning, how that works together, how that gets connected, so that you can, if you haven't already started, then this will give you some ground level of impetus to begin your work. So our whole idea is to invest in you in many ways, to support you as much as we can, but we want you to invest in being intentional in your coordinated effort. And just by the fact that we have a broad variety of folks on this call is just a really good indicator that that it is what we are intending to see, that we like to see, that level of participation and variety. Strong communities make strong families. We're really talking about moving this prevention work further upstream. And if we don't know how the children are doing, then how can we do the work that we're doing? We want our kids to be safe as well. So could you go to the next slide, please? The next slide. So how are we going to achieve this vision? When you think about how you imagine this, California envisions a prevention program that serves families. They're able to get the necessary supports and services that they need so that they can stay in their communities. And we create what we call nurturing environments. Try to imagine what a community will look like where they're able to go in any place in their community, whether it's a resource center or a community center or even hospitals, so that you could go in and get the kind of needs and you get screened for those kind of supports and services. So we're looking for an integrated statewide system that supports families. And I'll talk a little bit more about the equity lens, but This is our vision to strengthen families in their communities, and I can't say that enough. I always try to quote our federal commissioner, Aisha Schomburg. She says, we should envision a state of mind or a state of environment where a loving approach to helping children to attain what they need so that they live with dignity by comprehensively supporting their families and through a collaborative network. And it's based on those carefully selected resources that are effective as a result of public and private investment grounded in your community's culture, and having a workforce that is fully devoted to serving with intentional equity. So I know that was a lot, but I think that is just really where we're trying to get with this work. Next slide, please. So we always talk about this mind shift and how do you think about achieving this vision. Shifting the mindset so that we're not reactive all the time. Let's be proactive and be on the offense and not on the defense, and making sure that services attend to the things that people need, the conditions of where they live, grow, as they say, the social determinants of health. It's just that it's the community, it's the neighborhood where they live. If they don't have places to eat, they don't have good health care, if they don't have ways to minimize the violence in their community, all that contributes to their well-being. So from prevention to well-being overall. And then looking at how we engage our community. We say that symbolically a lot, but really making that culture shift requires a willingness to do the work. It's meaningful for people to have positive outcomes and to be able to live, as I said, in the community in good living conditions. You and I want those same things. Why shouldn't the communities that surround us or that we support or that we drive through, whatever those neighborhoods are, they should have the same things when we talk about good living conditions. And so to the extent that we can play a role in that, and we meaning all of the cross-sector populations to do that, that is sort of the impetus of the work that we're intending to lift. And making sure that that lived experience voice can find a place in the planning and in this work is important, because communities know what they need and they will happily tell us. We just have to be willing to listen and be willing to be actionable for what is being shared with us. Next slide, please. You've seen this before. I won't spend a lot of time here, but it's important to understand what the levels of prevention that we're basically talking about. Starting at the base of the tier, you think about primary. That's your general population that we're trying to reach. When you see a lot of the public campaigns to talk about preventing child maltreatment, that's your primary prevention. And then you look at secondary, those are services and strategies when the family or the child are beginning to present with risk factors. And then tertiary is once there has been child maltreatment, of course, then services are then put in place. And that's where child welfare is footprinted is in that tertiary level. And with the prevention world, we're trying to move further upstream. But when kids do come into the system, we do want to make sure that we can make a difference and that we're not a hindrance. So once again, this continues the theme. So how do we plan on doing it? We're implementing a comprehensive continuum of services, and we have a framework built on those three tiers. We want to expand the services, what we're already doing. So think about what you're already doing. If you had an opportunity to expand that, what would that look like in your community? And how would you bring those services to bear to the table? How would you discuss that in your community? How do you engage your community? And we know that that is a challenge, that structurally, when you think about government, you don't think about government as an engaging entity. So, suspicious folks in the community might say, oh, the government wants to engage with us. What does that mean? So this is really making sure that you are really thinking about how you engage your community. What does that look like? Um, and then increasing your capacity to integrate. We use that word, we use that concept a lot, and we realize that it's a lot to bring folks together to do an integrated approach. But you have to be willing to do the work and put in the time. And I'm thinking the tools that we, over the next 2 or 3 days here, are presenting to you and giving you an opportunity to think that through will result in the kinds of things that you need to do to engage your community and come up with a really good prevention plan. And then providing the holistic models of care, whole child, whole family, the whole community approach. I mean, that's a concept that's been around for a while. And I think for child welfare, I think it's good to hear that we are taking on that sort of whole family concept and not separating families. Even though our emphasis, you always hear us say child and family, a child is part of the family, right? So it's the whole family, whatever that's defined as, that's what we need to be focusing on. Um, and a lot of this framework is built in an ACL that we developed, ACL 2223. I'll have them place that in the chat. And throughout the presentation, there is references to that ACL for different parts of this presentation. And as I also said, all of this must be done with an equity lens of diversity and inclusion. We must thread equity in all of the areas of our systems work, program work, practice work at all levels. Is crucial to benefiting the communities that we serve and those that are disproportionately impacted, that have experienced multi-generational systemic racism. You know, this time 2 years ago, this was very, very emotionally on everybody's mind when you think about the whole George Floyd incident. And here we are 2 years later, and you wonder if folks still have that passion to really put in the work. Now that the emotion is still there, giving the environment, but people really still need to understand that the structural racism pieces and upending those pieces are work that is necessary for this as well. So we must honor those voices, even if we risk the opportunity of not necessarily liking what we hear. That is not the purpose. The purpose is to reflect their perspective, reflect the perspective of the communities that are being impacted. And families can tell you what they want. Communities can tell you what they want. They know what prevention looks like from their perspective. It is important for us to make sure that as part of this prevention planning, that we consider those voices and thread it so that we can have meaningful impact for all types of families. We must unify equity around avoiding family separation as much as possible. And not just, when you think about that being a unifying force, it is not just in child welfare. You've seen it in the whole refugee community world. Keeping families together is a unifying voice. And recognizing out there that there are culturally responsive services, whether or not well supported on the evidence-based practice rating. However, we're going to work to understand how we might move those higher up on the level because of the EPP level. So that is more the work that the department is going to be working with counties to do. Make sure you have a good governance structure. Make sure relationships are strong and important. And I like to highlight the relationships, especially with your tribes in your communities. Very, very critical. Being able to engage in meaningful conversation and consultation are missing pieces. We must continue to fill those gaps. Can't reimagine this system, like I said, unless you address the structural racism, be able to adapt and practice what we call our integrated core practice model. Families must be able to experience the community, the engagement with our system the same way. That's what our practice model is. So in our community, in our prevention fan, we have a community pathway. I think that's very promising, and I'm looking forward to seeing where that help is needed to shape a really robust and supportive community pathway. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning. I am going to do a little bit of retrospective history, give you a little feeling for what's been going on. It's so wonderful to hear about the vision and where we're all headed with prevention. Give you a little bit of background on some collaborative work that's been going on. So for the last, and Cheryl just mentioned the integrated core practice model. For the last 10 years, our organization, Child and Family Policy Institute of California, has been facilitating the development of the child welfare core practice model, which is the foundation on which the integrated core practice model was launched. And as we were doing that work in 2017, our organization was challenged by the County Welfare Directors Association to broaden our focus to embrace prevention. In 2018, based on that, the Child and Family Enrichment Cabinet, we originally called the Prevention Cabinet, was formed as a partnership between County Welfare Directors Association, the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, the Child Abuse Prevention Center, and Strategies TA. We developed a mission to inspire and support each California county to develop an integrated system to support families in providing safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments for their children. With that mission in mind, we tried to figure out how do we get this work going at the local level. So in 2019, we hosted on January 31st and February 1st a prevention summit in San Diego. We invited counties to apply. We thought maybe we'd get 10, 11 counties. Well, it turned out that 36 counties were interested in launching this work at the local level. Unfortunately, we only had capacity for 22, but those 22 attended. They were convened by Child Welfare and CAPC co-hosts to bring those teams together to develop action plans for moving forward. And those counties have moved forward. We brought them together again later that year. And then next slide. Between 2019 and 2022, Strategies TA and OCAP have been we're working with counties, designated counties, to strengthen their local planning efforts. So a lot of stuff's been going on the ground at the county level. A year ago, in 2021, we had the second Prevention Planning Summit. Due to COVID, it was virtual, but again, inspiring teams to strengthen communities. We were able to bring additional counties on board and to support and expand collaboration in promoting healthy, strong, and resilient children, families, and communities to increase positive outcomes by inspiring local teams to embrace the purpose and shared mission of the work, providing safe space for creativity, increasing connection within and among teams, and celebrating continuity. So all of this work is culminating in the work that we're here to talk about today, which is merging previous planning work with the FFPS planning to support comprehensive prevention planning. A little bit of that sort of overview background, and then I'm going to turn it over to Troy Nichols from Strategy TA to tell you a little bit about what Strategies has been doing to support counties in their prevention efforts. So Troy, take it away.
Definitely. Thank you, Stuart. And thank you, Cheryl, for those inspiring words getting us started this morning. First, I'd like to point out on the right side our values, our core values, and how they have already been spoken about by both Stuart and Cheryl, and they're woven into this whole process and what we do. And we came up with these long before we knew what an FFPSA was. So it shows you the marriage and the collaboration that's already occurring. I'm going to take you just for a moment through our mission and some of the things that we've been doing to assist this process. We support cross-sector networks throughout California, and we advance community-driven action to help strengthen communities. And I like that Cheryl pointed out that it's not just our children, it's not just our families, it's communities. Sometimes in the work that we're doing, We have folks concentrating on just the counties, not realizing, again, there's a community that has to come to action. We work with child welfare systems and child abuse prevention councils to build a county and statewide coordinated, comprehensive, and integrated networks. This technical assistance is throughout the state, and it's to help with long-term solutions, right? We don't want this to be a short-term fix. We want longevity and sustainability. And both the Child Abuse Prevention Center of Sacramento and Children's Bureau of Southern California, we co-lead this effort. So just a few of the things that we've done over these past 2 years in supporting the counties and these county prevention teams who are very elaborate and have quite a few folks at the table that are helping with this process. So we're currently working with 29 counties. And the consulting that we provide, we've put into categories. So these are our actual categories that we use to document our work, providing subject matter expertise and product development, process consulting, like how do we get through this process together, leadership coaching also, information gathering, facilitation, and group capacity building. And one that's overarching that we don't have as necessarily a service, but we have to do it is our relationship building, right? Developing our relationships and making them cohesive so that we can get this work done. And we also support counties in the development of this implementation of the comprehensive evidence-based child abuse prevention plan. So it's a huge aspect. And again, like you to see all the threads that are running through both Cheryl's and Stuart's presentations coming to the mission and vision that we have as well. Next slide. So why should we collaborate? Well, it's the only way that this work can get done. We have to have everybody at the table, right? And it ensures that we're working together collectively, you know, that collective impact model and mentality, so that we can help these conditions that lead to reduction of child abuse and neglect in our communities. Again, that community word, right? I often encounter folks who feel like this is not me or part of me. Well, your kids may be going to school with somebody that's affected by this. And so it's about community. I want to keep that in mind. Broader understanding of strengths and needs in the local community. So a strengths-based approach, making sure we understand that, you know, there are great things going on within the worst communities, the communities that are most challenged. So we have to find those strengths, build on them, and continue to add more, including the voice of that lived experience and lived expertise in developing programs and services. We can't do it without talking to the people, without having the people at the table, inviting them to the table, but also maintaining them at the table, not just inviting them. Representation isn't enough. We have to have inclusion. Establishing an ongoing alignment and coordination. So there's that ongoing concept again. We want sustainability in this work. We don't want to throw all of this time, effort, and money to this and it not be something that's sustainable throughout the years to help our communities. And this is just a list of the cross-sector partners. So the required partners based on the ACL are on the left, but the recommended partners, I'm going to say, are just as important to bring to the table, to have to the table. I work with quite a few of our counties in making sure our faith-based communities, because often they're a fixture in our county and they're on this list as well. So take a look at this and just have in your minds that community and community efforts and collaboration is the only way we're going to get this work done, and Strategies TA is at the base of it. So I'd like to reintroduce Cheryl Treadwell, our branch chief, to take us through some of the comprehensive prevention planning information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Troy. That was great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different pieces here that I mentioned earlier about FFPSA. So the Families First Prevention Act was passed in 2018. It provided a new option for states and tribes to finally use what we call 4E entitlement funds for evidence-based prevention and trauma-informed services for children and youth. And we use the word deemed candidates. That basically means that these are children who are identified at risk for entering foster care. So this is the first time that we've been able to use money that normally is used for placement for services. And not only just plain services, but services that fall in these three categories. They are either in-home parent skill-based programs, mental health services, and substance abuse prevention and treatment services. But they must be evidence-based prevention. And as you know, there is a clearinghouse that the feds operate, and so those evidence-based interventions must be on that registry. It's intended, as we've been talking about, to reduce the entries into foster care by moving upstream and using funds for prevention services and interventions that will reduce the risk factors. So that was the federal program. So our state program is California's Families First Prevention Services Program. Of course, it doesn't help us the fact that we decided to name it the same as the federal program, and I know that has been confusing to people, but what is the connection between the two? What our prevention program does is it leverages the current prevention efforts that many of you have already started in your community, and it reaches a broader audience than what the feds require. And our whole idea is to reach families sooner by looking more at the primary aspect and secondary than some of the tertiary aspects of prevention. We build into our program a comprehensive plan requirement, and we also making sure that counties in their comprehensive prevention plan are doing culturally appropriate and responsive services, tailored. It has to have a cross-sector approach. All of the things that we've been talking about previously that involves all of the entities that are required for this to be successful. That's your collaborative approach. We also meet the minimum federal requirements of FFPSA Part 1. And then for our state program, as I said, we go beyond what the feds require. Now, I want to say this. A lot of people, when FFPSA first came out for Part 1, it's like, wow, prevention, we get to do a lot. Realize this, that the federal program may be well intended, but it tends to be a lot more restrictive if you really get into the details. It is not a door that you can drive a truck through. It's an opportunity and should be considered a tool in your toolbox for building a comprehensive prevention continuum of care. And that is what the state program does. And so that's the difference. We're trying to get people to stop hanging their hat all on the federal program. And I'm not condemning the program. I just want to make it clear that there are some restrictions with the federal program that does not allow us to do some of the things that we like to do to build a really strong, comprehensive prevention system. So go to the next slide. So here's a comparison, as you can see here. As I said, and I won't repeat as much as I just mentioned, is that on FFPSA Part 1, you have to meet a candidacy criteria defined, and we put that in California's prevention plan. You have to be either at risk, imminent risk for placement in foster care, and then we have a list of candidacy populations that we have put into our plan that really, I think, are expansive and creates a universe of eligibility for folks. Then it also applies to pregnant and parenting foster youth. As I said, we are available for EBPs only. And in our state FFPSA program, you have flexible funding for all three levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. That is a difference from the federal program. You can support any target population with the goal of preventing child maltreatment. And then the funds that we have provided can be used for direct services, or it can be used to develop your infrastructure for prevention services. They are not restricted to just funding the 10 evidence-based, well-supported practices that are in California's current plan. That you can use the state funding to fund other services as long as they're preventing maltreatment. So this is just another way to depict the comprehensive prevention plan. Basically, your state program, in accordance to what we put in the statute, which is cited here, you have to opt into the program and you have to submit your comprehensive prevention plan to the state. And once again, it should cover all of these, it could cover all of these tiers and levels of primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. As you see, tertiary, that encompasses the FFPSA Part 1. So that's really closer to what we do now when you think about your family maintenance systems, kids already with open cases in child welfare. That is really where some of the money is being targeted for FFPSA requirements. So you must include that in your plan when you opt in. You must make sure that you are at least addressing the tertiary prevention strategies in your plan in order to receive the block grant money. You can't just take the block grant money and not talk about Part 1 requirements. So that's how the two are linked together. Here's just another way to show the puzzle pieces. So these are the components. You have FFPSA. They require us to have a 5-year prevention plan. And so we enacted a statute that provides flexible funding so that you can develop your local comprehensive prevention plan. And that's your block grant. And voila, you have your Families First Prevention Services Program. So we try to do our best of threading all of the elements together, and the hope is that it comes together in your comprehensive prevention plan in one document. You've seen this slide before. Some of you have, maybe not. This just shows the roadmap, and you can drop in the chat the picture of this roadmap here. It just basically explains what we had envisioned, and basically just to start with some foundational guidance. A lot of you have participated in our Reimagining series and webinars on community engagement. We started that series, and you move through this continuum to start building your capacity and your readiness. If you note in the slide where the red pieces are the lollipops, as we call them, that's where the key pieces: capacity building, asset mapping, opt-in, do your readiness work, decide what your target populations are going to be, go through this planning process so that you result in a prevention plan, and then be prepared to deliver services. And as a result of this, our job is to provide that kind of support to you, and we have brought together a team of folks to provide capacity and readiness assessment supports to you, in addition to what many of you are probably already doing in your counties. Next slide, please. So what funding can be leveraged? You have a lot of funding sources, or many of the funding sources that are already in your coffers. You have your Family First Transition Act funds, your Promoting Safe and Stable Families. You have your State Prevention Block Grant money. And then most recently, we have disseminated your community-based child abuse prevention funds, which we refer to as CPCAP. And then the American Rescue Plan Act issued additional CPCAP funding that was to be used for primary and secondary populations. FFPSA Part 1, as I said, is for individuals qualifying based on candidacy. So together, all of these funding sources can be leveraged to create that continuum of prevention services, which is indicated by the arrow on the bottom. So basically, I think California is well off in the sense that we have enough investments to really direct the resources, I would say in my state career, to really be thoughtful and meaningful about how you plan for the services, that you are funded to do that. And I know folks are probably like, well, how does all this work and how is all this going to come together? There's work and there's support for that as well. But I also encourage you to not overthink this. If you're already doing this work, how would you expand, and what do you need to expand to, and what communities are you missing? I mean, it really requires you to sort of do that reassessment and really just target these funds in a very meaningful and thoughtful way. And don't make it complicated, as I said. Just listen to what folks need. Keep it simple in that regard. And just sometimes I think there's a perceived barrier of we can't do this with the funding. But I think with the state funds, they're pretty flexible. We were pretty clear in our letter what was allowable. The letter that was previously dropped in the chat has the information with what are some of the allowable activities as well. So next slide, please. Now I will pass it on to Richard Connect, who will give us some of the ideas around systems of care and how it intersects with this work.
I really appreciate the chance to spend a few minutes with you this morning and ponder on what I think is an extraordinary opportunity in California. I really appreciated Cheryl's quick reference to the puzzle pieces, right, of good comprehensive prevention planning. And I was reflecting quickly back to a recent experience I had with my grandkids when we broke out a puzzle. And we made a whole lot more progress putting that 500-piece puzzle together when all the grandkids came to the table. And so it reminded me once again of the power of collaboration. That's really what I'd like to spend the next 8 or 10 minutes talking with you about. You have heard thus far from Cheryl, Troy, Stuart, about what is really a visionary perspective about what's possible in California when it comes to prevention planning, and want to just invite reflection on the criticality of the word comprehensive here, that we're talking about getting for the first time in California in a meaningful way, a sustainable way to really impact the social determinants of health. So it's prevention planning beyond child abuse and neglect. It is prevention planning in that most comprehensive way. Let me invite us to go to the next slide if I can. And just give you a chance to reflect. These are some of the questions I hear from the field in my work with both the state and in some other work I do with county and community-based systems. So I just want to see if you can't find yourself reflected here in some of these critical questions. If you're worrying about where you're going to find the resources with the workforce issues present to implement FFPSA, if you're wondering about how you're going to do the match that's required to really maximize the federal participation, if you wonder about how to measure the impact of your prevention work, if you're worried about whether or not your prevention work might actually negatively impact the demand for services on your partners, or if you're wondering about how you connect your FFPSA work to other prevention work, we're going to try to help you answer that this morning in the next couple of minutes. If you are an ILT member, an interagency leadership team member underneath the Assembly Bill 2083 work, I hope that you'll come away with some ideas about how to embed and connect the work of your planning process for comprehensive prevention planning within the system of care. If you're less familiar with the system of care effort, I hope you'll come away at the very least inspired in the next 10 minutes about how you can engage your senior managers in your county systems to embed the work there. By way of context, the empiricism on program implementation would suggest that partnership is needed, and that within that partnership, we have to attend to issues and processes at the policy and leadership level, at the management level, and then ultimately at the practice and community level. So this is complex work. And it really invites us into a shared sandbox where we can avail ourselves of the resources and expertise, wisdom of our education partners, our behavioral health partners, our regional center partners, our public health partners, and our tribal communities. So this is a comprehensive prevention plan that, while it lies primarily with child welfare and probation in terms of the federal vision, it's best done, and particularly in California's perspective about this. What's beautiful about California's approach is that it really is intended to have an impact at multiple levels. So the Assembly Bill 2083 work, about 2 years old now, a little over 2 years, invites, demands that each county have a memorandum of understanding. And the MOU that anchors the Assembly Bill 2083 system of care work for children and youth was intentionally structured for opportunities like FFPSA. And we'll make that clear in the next couple of slides. It's within the interagency leadership and the related conversations where you will best be able to do things like identify who your local candidate population is going to be. It'll inform your plan. It's where you'll best be able to identify what services to offer and by which local agency, how to leverage and account for the various funding streams, those at the state, federal, and local level, and ultimately how to develop a good comprehensive plan. So it really invites us to think bigger, and the system of care is prepared if your county has invested in that, or if it's prepared to invest in that. As you start the CPP planning process, you'll be well positioned. The quote here at the bottom of this slide is from the state system of care toolkit, and I'll just give you a chance to reflect on that. That's really what we're talking about here. And so on some level, FFPSA is perfectly positioned to take advantage of the system of care work underneath Assembly Bill 2083. So as we break this down a little bit, if you're an FFPSA planner, you know that in the state's guidance, and I'll just pause for a moment and just celebrate and acknowledge Cheryl and others at the state for that beautifully crafted letter in March that she's referenced a couple of times already. It really does spell out the imperative of being in partnership to do a good comprehensive prevention plan. But you know that there are 9 domains that are expected within your planning process in terms of particularly how you assess your readiness. And so on the right-hand side, so on the left-hand side, you'll see those 9 domains represented. And I just want to quickly visually point out that on the right-hand side of this, 5 of your 11 system of care MOU elements are in that memorandum and in a cross-agency, multi-agency agreement just for this purpose. You can begin to see the alignment then and the readiness issues that you can address within a system of care. The 5 elements of that MOU that are most salient or most critical to a good comprehensive prevention planning process include how you're going to maximize the financial resources, where your interagency leadership team will create a vision for your prevention work, how you will screen, assess, and enter care. And in this case, candidates is a new population, right, that you're going to be able to serve, how you're going to address the workforce issues, and of course, how you'll deal with information and data sharing. So that MOU then is perfectly situated as an architectural blueprint for how you would engage in a planning process for FFPSA. You'll see here a kind of a visual representation that I hope makes clear that FFPSA is not the only opportunity to inform your comprehensive prevention plan. There are in every single county other parallel prevention and diversion efforts that really should be connected to and inform your more comprehensive prevention plan. So as you look around the circles in this graphic, your partners in or adjacent to child welfare and probation are already doing tier 1, tier 2 kinds of things. These are prevention frameworks that are already in place in some level or are about to be in place. They may be emerging prevention approaches, but you can see, and this is not a comprehensive list, I would add. So each of these circles visually, ideologically at least, connects to and should have a place within what eventuates in your county as a comprehensive prevention plan. I'll just point out that each of them, and the reason that they connect, and the reason that this is such a powerful opportunity is each of these efforts on some level requires its own needs assessment and kind of gaps determination, right? Each of these efforts requires a planning and reporting process. There's compliance efforts in each of these efforts. You'll have to gather data around program impact and monitoring the outcomes of these prevention efforts. And of course, there are fiscal dynamics that underscore each of these efforts. Why not do all of that together with your partners? They're already doing it with you. You may not know it, depending upon how well integrated your system is. And the big irony here, and the reason that this CPP opportunity in California is so powerful, is that so often we're already serving the same youth or family, and we don't even know it, or we're trying to prevent or divert care into an early interventive, community-based support or service system, and the other systems don't even know it. So you can imagine then, if we have a brand new prevention system and we have candidates identified as expected under FFPSA Part 1, those young people may already be getting preventative diversionary care in community. And how will we know that if we're not in partnership with others? So it just underscores the need and opportunity present within a good comprehensive prevention plan. Not to belabor the prior point, but here's a partial list of some of the just extraordinary opportunities. This is a moment to celebrate the legislature and the governor and the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the superintendent of schools for just supporting with incredible resources, probably way more than we can spend in California in the next 3 or 4 years, right? But these are the opportunities, all which connect around prevention or early intervention. And you can begin to see where the potential, the grandiosity, if you will, of a good comprehensive prevention plan and the reach of that will be maximized when we're connected to these efforts. We don't have time today to explore them all, but to the point of our little conversation right now, only when you're connected to your interagency partners through the system of care can you begin to structure a conversation each month or however often you need to have it around what are you all doing with your Cal AIM work, right? What's First 5 doing right now that already connects to our Part 1 plan? What are our state Cal MHSA school grants doing that could be leveraged as part of our FFPSA or comprehensive prevention plan, right? So again, way too numerous to count, but these are just some of the exceptional opportunities that are available to us. So as you think about how to engage the interagency leadership team within your system of care work in your county, some of the inquiry that might be useful as you go there is talk to them about what first steps, or talk with your partners about what first steps are needed for us to begin planning. Where would you like to go? What's the vision for us locally? How will the plan be captured? And it'll be important, and I think the state will provide us with a project management tool or some kind of a document for us to kind of scaffold ourselves on, so to speak. But you're going to want to make sure you document that and use that in an interagency way, if you will. It'll be super, super important that fiscal managers know and understand each other in a way that lets them analyze and evaluate how to maximize the shared revenue opportunities, how to develop the structure for matching the 50% that comes out of Washington, and then the additional monies that come from Sacramento, along with your local monies. You're going to hear either today or tomorrow about the need to spend the Medi-Cal dollars first. And so your county mental health plan, your public health department, they're going to have to be at the table for your fiscal folks to make good planning conversations and then ultimately inform your plan about how to do that payer of first resort, payer of last resort dynamic, if you will. Additional questions that the ILT might benefit from hearing about is what existing prevention services or supports are in place that you can leverage. You heard Cheryl talk about some of those. And then ultimately, what's the data that each partner has under their current, existent, historic prevention work that might inform our plan. There's no need in some cases to replicate or create redundant data analyses. You may have data, your partners may have data at their fingertips from having just done some kind of a needs assessment, right? Some of that data might be present within your system improvement plan, your county self-assessment. It may be present from your probation partners who are obligated to do some analysis under their Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act or Youth Offender Block Grant work. The schools are doing local control accountability planning. The county mental health plans oversee a Mental Health Services Act PEI plan that every 3 years or so has to do some stakeholder inquiry. There may be some information and data present there. Public health partners are constantly doing community-based data. And so there are just numerous opportunities to evaluate what existing data is present. And it's the interagency leadership team where you can best inform yourselves and your partners about, hey, this is what our recent data says, and this is where we can begin to share our data going forward. Next slide, and I apologize for the abbreviations. We'll spell all those out. So let me just emphasize here that these are outcomes that come from the system of care work. And this comes from about 35 years of research. And so I'm not going to belabor any detail here, other than to just give you a moment to reflect on these impacts and recognize, I hope, that these are the almost identical kinds of impacts that any good comprehensive prevention plan would seek. In other words, the same outcomes that we desire from a comprehensive prevention plan are possible and present within good system of care work. Hypothetically, then, by induction, if we had been doing good interagency system of care work in California for the past 35 years, when we first attempted it, we'd have these outcomes already. And so things like FFPSA and CalAIM would be an afterthought, right? We wouldn't need those tools, frankly. And so the goals of FFPSA and a good comprehensive prevention plan will be maximized when we are in partnership with others, and we're far more likely to reach the outcomes and have the impact that we desire by being in the same sandbox with others. These are the same, in essence, the same goals, or will be similar goals to what you'll seek to do underneath your comprehensive prevention plan. Next slide. So finally, as I wind up my brief time with you, some recommendations for you. And again, apologize for the abbreviations. I'll try to speak these out as best I can. But as you consider how to connect the work of your comprehensive prevention planning process as it's required by FFPSA and the system of care work, you'll want to ensure that your interagency leadership team, that ultimate management body within your county, is meeting frequently and supportively. And I say this I offer this as the first recommendation because we know that there are in many counties, at least per the MOUs that we've seen, interagency leadership bodies that do not meet frequently enough, frankly. In all honesty, they're meeting quarterly or semi-annually, and you will not get the work done in an interagency partnership that does not meet more frequently to allow you to address the kinds of planning processes that are required here. So encourage, support, some adaptation if necessary, get the ILT members into a more frequent meeting. And of course, then obviously you want to agenda routine prevention planning work within that ILT agenda. So it becomes almost a standing item, right? So use that hopefully monthly interagency leadership team process to actually agendize and deal with the prevention planning issues that are needed. As I mentioned already, you'll want to connect your respective fiscal managers. It's not too early to make sure they're introduced to each other from various departments and get them into some conversation around the fact that they're going to need to do a whole lot of work in the next 8 or 9 months to work out the technical details of the revenue sharing. The ILT is a great place to, as I've already pointed out, I do the identified gaps analysis and readiness work. This work overlaps again with public health, with your system improvement plan and your county self-assessment, with the Mental Health Services Act, and with the local control accountability planning work under the schools, tier 1 and tier 2 work under local control. So that the members of the ILT will know what those things are in their respective domains. But often we don't know what they are outside of the domain, but it's in that partnership again where you can put the puzzle pieces together. You'll want to begin to ponder on a little more specifically what an approach might be within how you'll apply the FFPSA dollars. And one of the brainstorms I've heard from a couple of counties is that they're planning to kind of expand their red team process. If you're unfamiliar with that, red team very briefly is kind of a mini triage process whereby child welfare and in some counties mental health get together on a relatively frequent basis, sometimes on a daily basis, to triage the referrals that come into Child Protective Services, right? From a broader perspective, and to apply a comprehensive prevention plan, you could imagine then an expanded red team, right, with other partners at the table to triage not just FFPSA candidacy, but triage all of the youth needs within our community, within our system of care. It's expansive. It would take some planning, but has, I think, potential power, if you will. The ILT is also a place where you'll want to have conversations around how do we maximize or leverage the existing parallel processes within the child abuse prevention, within the community. So things like the Child Abuse Prevention Council, inviting them to represent on some level or to report to or to inform the interagency leadership team. The Juvenile Justice Commission is active in your county on some level, depending upon your county size, and they could be a vibrant partner in linking some of the prevention work. Again, the Mental Health Services Act triennial process can be linked into the ILT along with the local control accountability plan. So the ultimate takeaway here is that the development of an effective shared programming approach can't be seen as transactional, right? You can't go into this interagency conversation to create a comprehensive plan and expect to barter, right? We're not going to trade resources. What we have to encourage ourselves through the interagency leadership team is to embrace this opportunity as transformational, that it's a way we change the mindset and the culture of how we do our work, so to speak. I see a quick question from Amber at Glenn around who should be on the ILT. That ILT membership is defined by your MOU, and Glenn County has a nice MOU. So I would refer you back to your senior management team to take a look at your MOU. It's typically department heads or deputies, along with the superintendent of school, the executive director of the regional center, and other folks within your county. So head back to your MOU where that's captured. I probably should add, I left one off. One of the other parallel processes to make sure is connected to the interagency leadership team as you contemplate planning is, of course, the First Five Commission, right? There's 20 years of legacy of great prevention work, and that's got to be at least an informative, if not an integrated piece of a good comprehensive prevention plan. Let me tie up here. Yeah.
Sorry, there was one more question about the timeframes for the 2083 outcome data.
So I apologize, I missed that question. And let me just take a stab at that. Oh, I see. What are the timeframes? So So thanks for the question. I wish that there were outcome demands, a mandate for monitoring of the 2083 work. There is no expectation within AB 2083 that you document or establish system of care impact. There's none present. What I'm trying to suggest, I think, is the outcomes I referenced earlier that come from the National Research on System of Care, that those are simply the same goals that you'll have established, right, within your comprehensive prevention plan. You're going to hear after the break at some point from San Diego County, and I just want to put them on the spot ahead of time and suggest it's a fantastic example of what can be done and what is possible when you are in high collaborative partnership for prevention work. It takes a tremendous amount of effort. They've invested a decade in the work, but you're going to hear a fantastic example about exactly what we're talking about anchoring comprehensive prevention within an interagency approach and using that interagency conversation to do that. My final takeaway is just an invitation to head back home, if you will, so to speak, to your ILT, your interagency leadership team, and just make sure that they own and steward collectively the comprehensive prevention plan work, and can give you some personal assurance that if you'll do that with some thoughtfulness, your planning process will be more impactful, will result in a broader, more actionable plan. You'll have more resources present because you'll be sharing, and ultimately your FFPSA work and your comprehensive prevention plan will be much more effective. Lydia, I will pass back to you, I think, at this point.
All right, well, I will go ahead and have Sarah take us to our break.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. Incredibly helpful information and really valuable. Thank you so much. So we just asked folks to kind of take a moment for some self-reflection. I know we've given you a lot of information this morning, and you're welcome to put this in the chat or just consider it for yourself. So after hearing more about California's vision for prevention, after hearing content presented today, what do you find yourself most excited about? So take a moment to think about that. And yes, I know there's been a lot of questions about the PowerPoint. We will be sending that out at the end of the day today. So you will receive the PowerPoint slides. We will also be posting all of these sessions today, tomorrow, and Friday will be recorded. Those will be on our Strategies YouTube channel as well. So we will next be hearing from Alex Morales with Friends NRC and the Prevention Mindset Institute. And I'd just like to take a quick second to give you a little background about Alex and his work. So Alex retired in 2018 as the president and CEO of Children's Bureau of Southern California, which is a nonprofit leader in the prevention and treatment of child abuse and neglect since 1904. Alex presently serves on the board of directors of the Child Welfare League of America. He's a consultant with Friends National Family Resource Center, and as I mentioned, the Prevention Mindset Institute. He's an active member of the Citizen Review Panel for California Office of Child Abuse Prevention, or OCAP, and an advocate for primary prevention and community wellness at the local, state, and national levels. So Alex, welcome. We're so glad to have you here.
Greetings. I'm excited to be with you and to share. I want to begin with, well, how did I get here? And I got here because I had wonderful parents, both of whom immigrated to this country from Mexico when they were children. I'm the first generation born in this country. And for a long time, I thought I got here because I had great parents. But what I really realized is that what helped my parents be great is a caring and compassionate community that supported them as they came to this country and tried hard to become successful and be contributing and raise their families. And overcoming the issues of racism, with my father being of darker skin and my mother being lighter, and the faith community that surrounded them and helped care for my brother and I, and the schools that taught us. This is how I got here. The starting point is finding the North Star of primary prevention. I lift this up because right now we are so busy putting together our puzzle parts. And I want to take a moment to have you lift your head up and see, well, where is the North Star where all this is going? By having that clarity, it allows us to move towards that directions as opportunities arise, as we overcome hurdles, as we have opportunities to find the words to frame what we are doing, as we have opportunities to advocate, to manage up in our organizations and in our communities, as we have the opportunity to form partnerships. So lifting up the North Star is what's so important about this effort. We recognize that this is not an exercise in a Waze type of map that will take us, well, you turn right in 5 miles and then you go another 10 miles and then you turn left. And we are all in unique situations with our geographies, with our communities, with the cultural differences among us, with the economic supports and our sizes. And so it's all different where we start from. And we will all have to find different paths as opportunities arise. But lifting up the North Star will help us know where we are working towards. Let me share what that North Star is. It's the child, family, and compassionate community well-being. And my purpose in this is to sharpen your attention to each of these components so that you can appreciate the distinction. We have moved from prevention to primary prevention, and from primary prevention to well-being. That is the direction that we are trying to move in. Because well-being is the silo buster that we need in our vision to help us create the compassionate community that we are trying to make a difference with. We are moving from the idea of child protection or child abuse prevention, from that, and moving away from child well-being standing alone, because we realize there is no such thing as a child. A child cannot exist without a family. It just can't happen. So you have to have recognize the interdependence of child and family. And the aquarium we all live in that nurtures us or has toxic chemicals in it is the community, and how we refresh that water that we can all thrive in, that can be a community of compassion that will nurture us. This is the North Star, where as you are building and creating the opportunities, not as simple as putting together a scaffolding that's already prefixed and a kit that you just put together with your puzzle parts, you will be trying to move in this direction. And I want to lift up the essential elements of this North Star. I'd like to spend the rest of my time kind of going over these different components that I would like to put a sharper, finer point on to help you again appreciate the distinctions of where perhaps we've been, where we are and where we're trying to go with our North Star. Probably of all the critical, vital elements of what makes up our North Star, and one of the degrees I have along with my social work degree is physics. And sometimes I speak in that language a little bit. So we say, well, I think our stars are made a lot of helium, and that's one of the primary elements that is most present in the makeup of our physical universe and our stars. Well, broad community ownership that is engaged and activated is probably the most essential element and that is most often overlooked. Today, we have evolved to the idea of creating broad collaborations and networks of services that can be provided to the community. But the North Star, where we are trying to stretch to, is ultimately not the ownership of the welfare of our children by a public entity or by its larger private sectors of the philanthropic community and nonprofits, but the broader community ownership of everyone who lives and works and exists in our communities. We have seen, well, what does this look like when you have an activated community? We've seen glimpses of it under the pain of tragedy that goes on in communities. When people come together with compassion and work together to attempt to bring about change and reform. But it's short-lived. It's not sustained. Our North Star wants an activated community that is sustained, and people, from whether or not it's their being part of an organization or living in a community, the more they feel ownership, the more then they change from being just a resident, just a recipient of the services around them, but they actually become the agent of the transformation that's needed and the support that's needed within their communities. An example of the crisis we've seen Ukraine and the crisis of war and how the people, not just the military force of Ukraine has been activated, but people have been activated to defend, to care, to nurture one another, to rescue one another, to support one another. We may have thought, well, what have our organizations done during the COVID era that we have been immersed in? Well, probably the biggest difference has gone on neighbor to neighbor, family member to family member, faith community to its parishioners, that has made the difference in the survival of one person and their family going through this horrible, life-threatening and emotionally isolating experience. It is that power that we are trying to ultimately, with our North Star, create the broad ownership, the engagement and activation of the community to make these changes. There are examples of this happening here in California. We're going to hear about some of that shortly and over the next few days. But since I have had an opportunity to see things at a national level, I wanted to lift up an example that's going on in Oregon of its 90 by 30 project, where its goal is to reduce by 90% the incidence of child maltreatment by the year 2030. And what it's done is it's divided an area of Oregon into 14 different regions. These are not 14 different counties, but 14 different regions. It has invited the community to identify what its needs are, to identify what the solutions are. It has offered those regions the possibility of evidence-based tools to assist, but left it to the community to choose which of those tools they felt was relevant. And then the community has volunteered to have its Welcome Baby Bundle program that it offers, volunteered to create its Roots of Empathy program in the elementary schools, where trained volunteers go into the public classrooms of young kindergartens, first graders, and second graders to help give examples and teach empathy. It is volunteered by the faith community to step forward to offer families who will take in and support other families in their community who are feeling a sense of crisis and need support. These are not foster families. These are families who are offering their home and their family to be supportive to their neighbor in a crisis for a period of time that they can then provide the safety and nurturance that the family needs. So this is the power of what engagement and an activated community can do. You know, we all know, and it's popularized now, the idea of the hybrid engine. We know that it is the gas guzzling part of that engine. And if you will, my association, the gas guzzling part of the engine is the services side of what our society does. There's a limitation to how many services we can deliver, how many professionals we can hire and retain, how many dollars will support their services. But it's the more unlimited power that is unleashed in the electric engine that at low speeds provides the hum of what allows a community to thrive and what allows the engine to move forward with relatively limited energy, because it's capturing the discretionary effort of the people and the institutions that are part of the informal support that goes on in communities, neighbor to neighbor, faith community, to the residents who live in our community. As we think about the broad ownership, sometimes we think about, you know, our goal is to include more voices at the table from the people with lived experience. But we do broaden the ownership, not because we want to be nice, not because we want to be inclusive, but we do it because we want to be relevant and effective. We've all experienced what it's like to receive direction from levels above that are not close to the situation or problem that needs to be tackled. And we know that when we're touching these problems, we know what makes sense from our experience. The same way the residents who live in our community and the organizations who exist in our community, they are the ones who have the most accurate, if you will, perspective on what the strengths are of their community and what works in their community. So this is such an important key element to our North Star, is the recognition that we need that perspective to allow us to more legitimately find solutions that work. The third point I want to lift up is there is a need to make an intentional shift in our North Star towards addressing root issues. We have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years at looking at individuals and families and communities with a deficit, dysfunctional lens. We perceive people as deficient, morally deficient, undeserving of help, and we have failed to give attention to the systemic issues that are toxic in the water that surrounds the children and families that exist in a community. And so our North Star needs to contain an intentional effort to address what those systemic issues are that are relevant in the communities where we exist and are working. Shared leadership and broad ownership, equity and compassion. These are not, again, just words to be inclusive, to be kinder, to be more contemporary with the words spoken of the time. We cannot get to the broad ownership that will activate the community, that can change to well-being at a large scale without overwhelming the gasoline guzzling systems of service delivery that we tend to approach our social problems and conditions with. Shared leadership, not our public agencies leading, but a table that has shared leadership where the owners and investors of the different sectors, not just the service sectors, but the different sectors of life in our community are present at that table. And the type of leadership that is allowing them to have share in the opportunity to be a leader, not just a voice at the table. A significant investment in the attention given to the primary prevention infrastructure. We are focused traditionally on the back end, where most of us do our work, as the emergency room setting and operation part of doing the critical operations of hospitals. That's where we exist. But we know that we are overwhelmed, just like our hospitals have been overwhelmed with the COVID experience. And our systems of being able to have sufficient resource families or foster families, if you will, the burdening of kin who often don't get the support they need and are aging, the difficulty in having higher levels of appropriate care to offer children and families, the complexity of needs that children and families arrive to us in the hospital. We know that we cannot be successful at that end of addressing what we're doing. If we used a sports analogy, we know that you can't win the game with a superior defense. The only way to score points in a game is through the offense, and the only way to score points in what we are doing is by having primary prevention and efforts addressed significantly towards well-being. And so the greatest investment versus just adding on to the substantial work in our secondary and tertiary prevention interventions, the most significant effort needs to be in building out that primary prevention part of what we're doing, to bringing the community to have the ownership and activation that we are talking about. That is what is so important, that we be focusing our attention as we find opportunities to capture resources that come before us to keep moving in that North Star direction. Economic well-being strategies to head off general neglect. This is a pretty specific element that I put into the North Star. Why have I done that? It is the most overlooked element across the country of what is so needed in our North Star. In California, as well as across the country, the vast majority, 2/3 to 75% of all maltreatment is child neglect. What do we do about that general child neglect? We provide mental health therapy, trauma-informed practices, parenting education practices. We do not have a toolbox prepared to deal with the issue of general neglect. For a condition that represents 2/3 to 3/4 of what we experience in our state and across the country, to not have an intentional strategy that addresses this in what we either do in tertiary, secondary prevention, or primary prevention is a long overlooked neglect that we have done as a society. There are some other states that have begun to move forward in this. And I wanted to lift up some of the work that is being done in Colorado. The District of Columbia is also doing work in this. And I believe California is also going to be doing explorations in what it can do to have an economic strategy. But what's being done in Colorado is an assessment instrument has been developed there. It's developed by its statewide Family Resource Center network. This tool, I believe, has 14 domains in what it measures. 10 of the domains are addressed to various areas of economic functioning for the family. It's asking and rating, how well does this family have money to pay their rent? How close are they to being evicted? To what degree are people employed? Is it part-time? Is it temporary? Are there anyone who doesn't have a job that can at least be working half-time on a regular basis? Is there sufficient money to pay for childcare? Are they connected to childcare? What savings do they have if they had to endure a crisis for a week or two or a month or 3 months? So it is evaluating specifically each of these domains. Then there are family navigators who are trained in how to use this family assessment, economic assessment tool to then develop interventions that come from Colorado's efforts to already at the state level blend its fundings together so that the integrator of the funds does not have to be the family themselves or the community worker at the line level or the nonprofit that's received the funding. It's already efforts to blend the funds at the state level, including discretionary funds that can be used with flexibility to meet those needs. They are finding reductions in recidivism of their neglect cases. They are finding that they are being successful by having these navigators placed within each of their family resource centers across their state. And their statewide family resource center network is the entity that trains those family navigators. So I'm not saying that California needs to do what Colorado's doing. What I am saying is Colorado is attempting to address the most prominent portion of the challenge that exists in general neglect that we face. There is great concern about the racism and equity issue in our society. And so we are tinkering at the back end with what we can do. Perhaps we can increase our implicit bias training. Perhaps we can look at our biases in how children are placed for the need of foster homes and moved from one area to another. Why our Black foster children are remaining in foster care longer than other children. But the greatest contributor to the inequity in our system of child welfare comes from what we're doing and failing to do with the general neglect. How these families are coming into our system because of the lack of systemic issues being addressed and the lack of tackling economic fundamentals by offering parenting programs and mental health therapy. Those are the things that we could be doing that would allow us to move the needle on equity in a more substantial way. Powerful data. So we all know that having a shared data system is important among the collaborative partners in what we are doing. But what is powerful data? Powerful data is data that will empower our community and their ownership and their activation. Powerful data allows not just the public agencies to know what is happening, but it empowers the community to know what's happening. I have suffered from high blood pressure for over 45 years. And I've gone through the experience traditionally of having my blood pressure checked every time I go into the doctor's office. But seldom do they tell me what my blood pressure is. They write it down in my charts. I always ask them, well, what is it? I am the one who most can use that information to take charge of my life and adjust my medications, know what's not working for me, change my diet, change my walking plan. Powerful data empowers me to be active in managing my own health. Powerful data allows our community that same opportunity to know how it's doing, to see its own gauge of how it's doing in its neighboring communities, so they can learn from one another how they're each solving and tackling some of their challenges. It allows us to be accountable to our community, not just accountable to our higher level institutions, but powerful data allows our community to then have the critical information that it needs. Blended funding. We talked about that when we talked about addressing the economic issues. But we need to, again, recognize we know the siloed funding streams and the impediments that creates for families and communities, our public agencies, our nonprofits at the local level. We know the challenges our state has, but we need to, in our North Star, continue with the intentionality of seeking to blend that funding to allow us to generate the resources that will be usable instead of putting this burden on the family itself that has to then navigate all of our siloed services and funding rules. The District of Columbia has made significant progress in blending their funding. Naturally, they have tremendous advantages given their size and different government structures that they have to work with. But I lift this up as a North Star critical element because it is where we're heading, where we must be heading. The idea that we would just leave this untouched in our prevention infrastructure building work does not make any sense for what we're doing. Our Indigenous community, the errors of our society that have gone back to the horrific history of some of the founding of our country, the errors in how we have mistreated our Indigenous community by trying to remove their cultural heritage. When we talk about prevention, as I listened to the listening tours that were going on in Wisconsin with their tribal communities, and I looked through their what they were hearing and what they were learning, the idea of imposing some of the evidence-based models that have been developed by mainstream communities and now being put forward to our Indigenous communities. And many of the Indigenous communities are saying, we would like to use some of these resources to strengthen our cultural connections with one another and our heritage. And they emphasized culture is prevention. And when we think of what the 5 protective factors that we have come to know that provide the strength for families to be resilient against the challenges in their life, social connections is so critical and vital. Culture and its deepening is like social connections on steroids. So allowing our Indigenous communities, if they want and if they ask, to be able to use prevention resources to strengthen their cultural connections. Research evidence is showing that given the challenges that our Indigenous people are facing, it is a strong protective factor to help against substance abuse, depression, and other areas to have a strengthening cultural connection. So the North Star, try to have that in your mind's eye so that you can again harness the opportunities that come before you. But as you become busy in assembling your infrastructure, in putting your scaffold together, it's important to know where you are going. So when the opportunity comes and you say, I don't think I'm going to call this primary prevention. I'm going to look for an opportunity to put in well-being. I'm going to look for an opportunity to put in child well-being, child family well-being, child family community well-being, child family compassionate community well-being, because just having a community doesn't bring in the critical element that we know we are lacking in our society, is compassion. We know it is a critical, vital ingredient for us to be connected with one another and to make that supportive difference. Again, I couldn't be more proud than to be part of California. It is probably the most advanced on having an infrastructure and in the intentionality of building this out across California. You who are leading the efforts to build this are really pioneers in the country. So as I lift up the North Star, as I challenge in us, well, look where we're going and look where we're at and look how we can get there. It is not a criticism, it's just to put a sharp focus so that you have a clear idea. But what is missing? How do I stretch for that? Again, thank you for all your work. On behalf of the families I've seen, on behalf of my own parents who benefited because other people were out there fighting for this, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. We appreciate those words of motivation and wisdom. I'm really excited to present the San Diego Partners in Prevention team and Amy Zeitz. I know Amy personally and the wonderful work that this team has done. So I will hand it over to Amy so she can share the prevention work that the San Diego team has done. So we're very excited to highlight this today.
Well, I'm so glad to be here today and talk about one of my, I want to call it a life passion, I would say. And I hope I do justice to the work our team has done. I'm going to do my best to represent us, although I know it's not ideal to represent shared work, but I'm going to do my very best. So like Lydia said, I'm Amy Zeitz. I'm Director of Strategic Advancement with the YMCA here in San Diego County. I've been in social services over 20 years, been in the prevention space for about 15 of those. And educationally, my background is as a marriage and family therapist. I'm going to share today just a little bit about our journey to prevention here in San Diego. And I'm going to focus both on what we've done and how we've done it. And then I'm going to share a couple of examples that for those of you who are new or early on your prevention journey, maybe they, spark some ideas or spark some conversations that really help you think about what fits for your community. So we can go ahead to the next slide. I am going to start with sort of this historical lens of our journey. So in the 1990s, San Diego was doing a lot of work around family resource centers and really building out that movement. This was before my time here in San Diego, but I understand also had some influence over FRC elevation across the state. And that really allowed us as a community to both I just jumped in on the tail end of Alex's presentation. He's talking about protective factors, and I would say that really grounded our work in FRCs at that time. And then also within our child welfare services, that is when they started their Safety Enhanced Together work. In 2019, we attended the first prevention summit. We at that convening, we had about 10 folks from across different sectors, and that group identified the 0 to 5 area as a focus. So when they really looked at child welfare data for San Diego and thought about where is it that we want to or need to make the most impact, that 0 to 5 space is what they identified. And one of our initial opportunities to sort of lean into something specific was around looking at preschool expulsion. So I won't go too deep in that conversation today, other than just to say it is a thing. If you're thinking, oh my God, is preschool expulsion a thing? It is. It disproportionately impacts boys of color, children of color, but specifically boys of color. And data does show that there is a connection to not just the school to prison pipeline, but actually the preschool to prison pipeline. So that was really where we dug in that first year after the prevention summit. And that group's, they named themselves the Pursuit of Happiness. I also wasn't at that convening, but I think there was a challenge to sort of pick a movie name. And what the work of that group, both at the summit and also in the year following, that became the basis of a proposal we submitted for San Diego County to the Children's Bureau for their work. Oh, shoot, I forget the formal title, but basically community collaborations to strengthen and preserve families was the funding stream. We submitted this proposal for what we called Partners in Prevention. And what we really wanted to do was to shift from not just prevention to, but actually what Alex was just talking about, building a child, family, and community well-being system. And so I'll walk you through both the contextual pieces that sort of led up to that, but then also what some of that work has looked like since 2019. So if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide, please. So I'm sure many of you have these pieces in mind, but we really thought about where are our strengths. When we were starting our prevention work, we were really thinking about where are our strengths, what do we have in place that we can build off of, and then of course where are the gaps that we want to respond to as we sort of re-envision and reimagine. So within our child welfare services, they were already going through quite a bit of transition, and I would actually call it transformation, of really thinking about how do they get a little bit more upstream. They reconfigured what was their CAPC into a child and family advisory board with a lot more intention and strategy behind it, and some really deep and reflective work for a year or two with heavy involvement from our board of supervisors. So I think that gave us an opportunity to elevate prevention. I also, here in San Diego, our early care and education space is pretty it's fairly robust in terms of our first 5. We have a healthy development services network that includes behavioral and developmental services. And we were doing a lot across our county looking at quality improvement in the early care and education space. And part of that included early childhood mental health, which is a best practice intervention around preschool expulsion. So we sort of bundled all those things together. We thought about how can we leverage those as opportunities to promote and support prevention activities. And then another piece that we have here in San Diego is with our 211 San Diego. We have a community information exchange, which is a shared web-based platform for client level records that supports care coordination. I'll go into more detail in a minute. If we can go to the next slide, please. And then more recently, with AB 2083, we have integrated leadership teams or interagency leadership teams being put in place to really think about these coordinated and comprehensive prevention plans. Of course, thinking about families first and the implications and the opportunities to really, for us in San Diego, we've been really thinking about how do we re-envision what family support and strengthening looks like, what does family health and well-being look like, and how do we put infrastructure in place around that? So that's really guided our work in FFPSA. And then part of that is also thinking about what other infrastructures do we need in place to have a community prevention hub. So for us, that's been looking at I don't know if folks are familiar with the community response guide process out of Evident Change, but that's both a tool and an engagement process to rethink mandated reporting and really think about what are the infrastructures, processes, relationships, and coordination we need as a community to respond to community needs and family needs outside of child welfare. So we're just starting that right now. I'll talk about community information exchange in just a minute. And then we also have been doing community engagement through something called Our Tomorrows. And this is a web-based platform out of the University of Kansas that allows us to capture and document family stories of experiencing or participating in resources, as well as some like so it's qualitative and quantitative data collection that we then visualize into infographics and then host community sense making sessions around. So the idea is really shifting from engaging with community to inform, to really co-designing and more authentically partnering with community to understand what's working, what's not working, and how else should it look. And I think we're really trying to integrate that into all the bits and pieces related to prevention and FFPSA. Okay, so that's kind of the background. So let me take you back to September 30th, 2019, when we got notification of the Partners in Prevention Award, which started on October 1st. So we quickly kicked ourselves into high gear. And one of the first things we did was really think about partner engagement. So who do we need around the table? How do we think about the pursuit of happiness group? Do we keep it? Do we integrate? Do we transition? What does that look like? And how do we do that in a way that honors our values around collaboration? So we put together both, so we went out, we thought about who do we need at table, what perspectives do we need, and for what elements of the project, invited folks, got folks sort of oriented to the work, but also asked, what did we get right? What did we get wrong? What are we missing? And so we didn't really bring a fully baked thing out. We sort of said, like, here's our best thinking to date. Now where do we go from here? So we started convening our partners regularly. With our advisory committee, we created a project vision, a definition of prevention. We identified shared values and principles, as well as roles and responsibilities. And I think all of these were really important. While they took time and they were very process oriented, so we didn't get to action right away, I think they were really important in making sure that we had a shared commitment, a shared vision, and that we were really aligned around where it was that we wanted to go together. And then we did some tactical things, like we made sure that we had a theory of change and clear strategies, activities, priorities, outcomes, evaluation plans, all those sorts of things. And a lot of times we would do that work within our team, and then we would bring it to our partners to vet and review and provide feedback and input. And then sometimes we would bring a blank page and say, this is kind of what we're thinking. Do you think this is a good idea? What should this look like? And we would sort of build it from scratch. The other thing we did within the first year of the project was a landscape scan coupled with listening or learning sessions. So this was really looking at what does the data tell us about what's happening in terms of child and family well-being here in our county. And then we would share that information in learning sessions with community members and community-based organizations to get their perspectives and their hypotheses on that data. Why was it so? What could we do to make it better? As well as other implications on sort of both sides of that lived experience. And then we shared out the learnings from those as widely as possible. We also did integration and alignment with other activities. So we looked at what else is happening across San Diego County or even at the state level, and where is there maybe overlap with the goals and strategies and activities that those efforts have with what we were thinking for Partners in Prevention. And then really thinking about, okay, then maybe they just hold that and we are a participant, or like we're going to hold this and they're going to like feel like they can take that off their plate. So I think one example of that is Caltrin was awarded the training grant from OCAP, right? And we had proposed to do an integrated learning system for San Diego. And we thought, well, we don't need to recreate the wheel. So we had regular meetings with Caltrin to say sort of what are your goals and objectives? Who do you intend to serve? Well, that's kind of what we were thinking. So we don't need to do that anymore, but how can we be helpful? How can we leverage our activities? And one example is they would do a training and then we would host a community of practice support to support implementation. So I think this constant like thinking and rethinking and understanding the landscape has been really important for us. I mentioned we had put a project vision together. You can see that here. The next slide is the shared values that we identified. So this included both big picture thinking together as well as quite a bit of wordsmithing, as you can imagine. But it's something that we, revisit. It still feels very representative of what our values and commitments are to this work together with our partners. When we did our initial project kickoff, we heard partners saying, this sounds so great, I'm super into it, but I don't do prevention. And I'm thinking, you do family and support, you do family strengthening and support work. So in my mind, you are doing prevention. So we wanted to create what we called a big tent prevention definition that really anyone serving children and families working on health and well-being, safety, health, and well-being, could see themselves in. And so that's what you see here. We also identified primary prevention as our primary focus, specifically for partners in prevention. We didn't want to get caught up or pulled into secondary and tertiary prevention, because there are lots of people already working on that in our community. And so we very clearly defined our area of focus on primary prevention. And I think that has helped keep us, I would say, laser focused on our work. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So this is really how we think about our scope of influence in this project. And we think about this always from the inside out. So even if we're doing lots of systems level change, we're always including in the conversation, okay, but what does that change, or what does it feel like for a child and family? What are the impacts to those who provide services? What are the impacts to those organizations? And what do we anticipate could be the impacts at the community level? And so we're also thinking about these levels of engagement in terms of design, co-design, providing feedback on the different pieces of this work. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So these are also, these are grounding principles that we identified with our partners and sort of agreed to them based on consensus. And this is less around sort of what are the values that drive our approach to this work. And these principles are more around our service delivery approaches and what do we aspire to deliver in a high quality and consistent way across our community. And so for this, this felt very equity commitment. All right, so our next slide here is our theory of change. We wanted something really simple to describe this massive thing that we were trying to do. And so the simple story of Partners in Prevention is that we think that if we can help increase family protective factors, we think we can increase family health and well-being and decrease the likelihood of maltreatment. And we think there's a couple things we need to do to make that happen. One is more consistently assess family strengths and needs, connect families in ways that work for them. So that can be where, when, how, and what the service is. We need to do better coordination across sectors, agencies, and services. And then there's some capacity building, right? We want to be able to build sustainability into the things that work about this, this thing that we're going to try. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. I'm sure you all are familiar with protective factors, so I won't go through these, but I will just highlight that this really has been the grounding framework for all of our work. We use that as we think about who should be around the table, how we hold these in mind around ensuring that families have equitable access to each of these protective factors. We can go to the next slide. These are our initial key activities, and I'm going to show you what our current activities are here for 2022 to show you that they have evolved. So the first things that we thought that we wanted to do was convene folks. We wanted to increase coordination and support services. We wanted to get early childhood mental health consultation out there into our community. And we wanted to facilitate family input and feedback early and often. That's where we started. I'm going to take a little bit of a divergent path for a second, because I want to describe what our community information exchange looks like here in San Diego, because I think it helps set the stage for the rest of our prevention journey here. So we can go into the next slide here. So the community information exchange is described as an ecosystem. So it's an opportunity for multidisciplinary partners to come together around using shared language, a resource database, so the resources, services, and supports that are out there in our community, and then using an integrated technology platform for enhanced service delivery. And for us in San Diego, for Partners in Prevention, this is really around coordinated care. So we can go to the next slide. This sort of digs into more detail on the specific components, which I said before, the network partners, the shared language, the technology, with the end result being really around care, community care planning. The other thing that I have always been sort of enamored with our community information exchange is this bidirectional closed loop referral piece. So 20 plus years in social services, I don't know if others have had this experience, but working with a family, understanding a need, they identify it as a priority for themselves. I provide a referral, could be a warm handoff, and then I don't know what happens, right? Like maybe I'm able to connect with the agencies I have referred to understand what happened, but I can't do that with every single referral I make. I can't expect that of all of my staff. I can't expect that of every other agency. So what the community information exchange allows us to do is make an electronic referral that then we can track what happens with the referral. Did the family, where they lost a follow-up? Were they successfully enrolled? Were they identified as ineligible? So we can track what happened. So then we could circle back with the family and say, hey, that seems like it worked out. Is that your experience? Or it seems like that didn't work. Like, let's go back to the drawing board. Is it still a need? Let's see what else we can find out there. So I think that's been a really powerful component of being able to move this idea forward around making sure families get connected to what they want and need. We'll go ahead to the next slide. One of the things our CIE includes is this risk rating scale. So you can see the domains here. You can see the domains that are sort of evaluated through their call center, as well as the scale of how sort of the immediacy of need. And this is something that's included in all the client level records. So I maybe am assessing on a few domains, but I'm sensing, or the family is saying, I have some other things going on too. These things can be sort of assessed and then reassessed as pre-post as the family gets connected to resources. So just wanted to share that. And if anybody's interested in chatting more about CIE or connecting your 211 to ARC 211, I'm always happy to do that. All right, so I'm going to get back to I just want to take that little side path, and now we're back on the main path. So this is our project infrastructure. So you'll see that the most important and central piece of this visual is our partner network. We started, we had about 25 letters of support for our application. By the time we did our kickoff, we had about 80 participants join us. A year in, we had maybe 250 folks on our email list, and now we have over 400. So we continue to sort of evolve who it is that we're engaging. And we do this through a very cross-sector perspective of thinking about what we always say is prevention lives everywhere and nowhere. And so that means anyone who's interested, come on in and we'll figure out how we work together to support child and family well-being. In addition to that partner network, we have a leadership team that's called our advisory committee. We also have a design team, which consists of our main project leads that you'll see over here on the left. So YMCA serves as the steward of this grant. We work closely with Social Policy Institute at San Diego State University as our consultant. We work with Harder and Company, Community Research as our evaluator, and we work very closely with our Child Welfare Services team. So that really makes up our design team. We meet monthly to sort of check in and co-design and plan together. We're also doing continuous quality improvement there on both processes and outcomes. And then we have a series of work groups. So this is what we originally proposed when we got started. These work groups here, we have moved forward with an assessment and referral work group. We decided not to move forward with a training work group because we were doing partnership with Caltran. Our community voice work group, we've integrated into all the things that we do. So it's not really a work group. It's just a new sort of strand of our work. We have not yet launched our preschool expulsion work group, but what we'll probably do is in the fall, we'll be launching a early childhood mental health work group to bring sort of stakeholders together around that. And then we also just have, we put ad hocs together. So when we identify a need and we're very clear that we shouldn't be solving anything on our own or thinking about it by ourselves, we'll pull folks together, we'll invite new partners to the table. And so this, I think at the end of our grant will look very different than what we thought at the beginning. So let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to share where we're at with our priorities for this year. We continue to both improve and increase our partner engagement collaboration. So in my mind, that's really about being more inclusive, continue to create this big tent of those who care for children and families and communities, as well as deepen those relationships. And so it's really this quality and quantity that we hold simultaneously. We continue to think about access and utilization of services. So I think this especially shows up in our Families First Prevention Services Act planning of thinking about where are our gaps in San Diego, what's working well, how do we build off and leverage from those? Are there opportunities for alignment that we either know about or don't know about? And how do we just continue to do this better? We also think about or have been doing capacity building, both for those interested in coming on board with community information exchange. We hosted a community of practice and we really just helped agencies walk through the process of like going live with CIE. It took maybe 6 weeks with some consultative support. And then we also provide training and implementation support for what we know are service delivery best practices. So things like strengthening families, trauma-informed care, culturally responsive practice. And we've also been doing a lot of work with healthy outcomes through positive experiences. So the HOPE model out of Tufts University. So we've been getting that content out there and then supporting agencies in implementing, because we really wanted to get away from this train and pray where we just go and then we like cross our fingers that folks are doing things differently. We've also spent a lot of time doing some work from the inside out around equity, inclusion, and lived experience. So when we looked around our leadership table, when we just started our advisory committee, we were mostly white faces. And I'm not saying we didn't have diverse experiences. We did. We had lots of diverse lived experiences, but we did not look like the community of San Diego. And so we've done a lot of work thinking about why is that? What do we need to do differently? What are the ways in which white dominant cultural norms have been perpetuated here? The way we run meetings, the way we invite people, the way we honor the written word, the ways in which we hold boundaries around personal and professional. And so we've been working with an external consultant to really dive deep at a leadership level. So not just our staff, but our core partners as well. And it's been really, really meaningful. I've started to say, I feel like I've turned myself inside out. Like I've been turning my whiteness inside out to just really acknowledge the ways in which it has impacted me as a leader and what I need to get out of the way to really do transformative work. And then the last piece is around early childhood mental health consultation. So we've been doing this work in San Diego in this particular way. We follow the Georgetown model out of Georgetown University for about 3 or 4 years. But we also know that we're never going to meet the need by ourselves as an organization. And so we've made a commitment to really bring others together who are interested in implementing this model to leverage and align and to really build a system of care in our 0 to 5 space here in San Diego. So that's coming up next in the fall. All right, so these are just examples of ways that we visualize our key activities with a little bit more detail. I'm not going to go through these. You can skip through this and the next slide. And I want to just spend a little bit of time on reflections and then any questions. So we can go to the next slide. I wanted to just highlight a couple of what we consider our success factors. And I also just want to say I didn't make these up by myself. We had a meeting with our core team last week, and they helped identify this and the next couple of slides that you'll see. So I'm just the voice of it. So I think we think that this role definition, actually just roles and responsibilities in general, have been really important. So the YMCA before this opportunity was not deeply entrenched in the prevention space. We were a funded partner of child welfare, but we were not a consistent participant in big picture thinking or strategic planning. And so in a way, I think that allowed us to come into this space with a neutral lens and perspective. I think we were able to really sort of bring folks together with the community at the center without hidden agendas. Like, we didn't need funding. We didn't need anything other than thought partnership and deep collaboration to make things different and better in our community. I think the language we used was really important. From the very first day, we talked about ourselves being a steward of this grant, right? It is not ours. It does not belong to us. This is in service to and in partnership with community. And I think that really set an important stage. So as I think about prevention planning, that's just been so critically important for us in this work. We also continue to spend a lot of time thinking about matching capacity with expectations and priorities. So I think it can be easy when we have these opportunities to do big picture thinking. This one is actually me by myself. I could get real big with my thinking. And I think having a team to really say okay, that sounds great, but what are we going to do for the next 3 months? And how is that going to get us to where we want to be in a year? And do we have the staffing and the funding and the partnerships and the depth of relationship to get there? The next thing that I would say is that, San Diego is fairly collaborative. We've been doing relationally oriented work for decades here. And I think we were able to really leverage that in our prevention work. My team and I spend most of our time in meetings or in one-on-one conversations with folks, because this work, systems level transformation work, it is relational. And so we probably combined, we attend probably 40 community meetings a month. We are out there, we're listening, we're learning, we're contributing, we're cross-pollinating. And I think that is the most important thing for how and why we've been successful so far. We have also spent some time talking about, pretty candidly and transparently, self and shared interest. So we have both sort of systems level leaders and decision makers, as well as direct service providers at our leadership table. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this in many sort of settings. But what we started to see was, as the work started moving and things started shifting to primary prevention, there was this sort of oh wait, what's the implication for my program? Am I gonna have to reduce staff? Or if we really catch families' needs upstream, is my program even needed anymore? So I just think we have to, as we started to see that, because we had the relationships that we had, we called it out, and we are still having those conversations, and honoring that there is this tension, right? Even though we want what's best for the community, we also deeply believe in the things that we're doing. And so how do we balance that? And how do we re-envision together what new roles and responsibilities can be in this transformed system? I kind of talked about cross-pollination before. We just spent so much time doing this, and I would just say it took us a minute to figure out like how to document it, how to connect the dots internally to then be able to connect the dots externally. So sort of like the internal process work, it took us much more time than I actually anticipated, but I think it was well worth it. Otherwise, we would have just ended up doing things sort of in this like disconnected way. This one is me. I'm going to take credit for this. Dream big and then build from where there's alignment. So I think we had some folks who were sort of wanting to start realistic. And then I think we sort of together got to this place of like, we got to start in the aspirational and then scale back to like what's realistic in like given time and capacity and funding. But when we talk about, are we doing like tinkering work in the beginning? I think we probably would have said we're doing tinkering work. We're just playing around the edges. We're trying to make things a little bit better. I would say now we're doing reform and transformation work. If you asked anybody on our team or our core team or our partners, I think we have gotten to this place of sort of authenticity around that, but that's not where we started. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about our lessons learned, and then just some considerations. So the first is, this is a no-brainer. Everybody's always talking about this, nothing about us without us. I would just say, like, we didn't do a very good job of that in the beginning. And I talked before about this. Commitment to equity has been an inside-out process for us. I think we also continue to struggle with this idea of how much, like, of course, we want to be inclusive and we want to co-create and co-design, and folks have full-time jobs. And so, or are like volunteering their time, or they're being compensated hour by hour. Like, this is our job. We're a backbone organization for a collective impact effort. We are funded to wake up thinking about this, and well, maybe not go to sleep thinking about it, but we might. And so how do we kind of take like the responsibility of that, but also not hold the power of it? And so I think trying to figure out like how baked do we get things before we share them? Do we start from scratch? Do we have the ingredients out on the table, or are we following a recipe? So just, figuring that out at each piece. The other, and I've kind of talked about this, like for us, this has not just been about convening partners. It's also been about going to where the work is already happening and honoring that. This work takes time. Relationships take time. Innovation takes time. Transformation takes time. And so it just requires patience. And that is not always like a comfortable or preferred pace for folks. I think the other thing we're really starting to see as the commitment to prevention is becoming a reality is this challenge or this tension between meeting immediate community and family needs while also getting upstream. So how do we sort of like balance the skills with that in a way that's responsive, but also not keeping us stuck in where we've always been? And then the last piece is just the how we do this work matters as much as the what, like what the actual thing is that we're doing. Okay, I have 3 minutes. I'm going to try to get through these last considerations. If not, y'all will have the slide deck. So the first is what you've heard me saying this whole time. What's going well? How do you build off of it? Where is there momentum and energy? What is the why behind your prevention work, and who is it intended to benefit? So we had to do a deep dive. We did a root cause analysis. We spent a lot of time on it to really understand what are the ways that our current prevention planning may be inadvertently perpetuating inequity, and what do we need to do about it? And we had to be real honest looking in the mirror around that. What are the gaps or needs that your prevention plan could possibly address, especially thinking about FFPSA? I talked about inadvertently the perpetuating piece. And then how do you keep the experiences, hopes, and aspirations of children, families, and caregivers centered in your prevention planning, right? So this is kind of about inclusion, and that can look so many ways, but just like we can get system level thinking, and then we always have someone who says like, okay, but what does this mean or matter to a family that lives down the street from you? And I think that has just been such a beautiful and grounding lens for our work. So I'm going to stop there. I know I talked really fast. I'm always available to chat. I love this. This is an amazing time to be in this field. And I think I also missed like a bunch of questions. So I don't know if we have time, but.
Well, I think that there was a lot of compliments to the work that you're all doing. I know that there are some folks that wanted to ask about if there's any academic or research organizations assisting you. What can frontier countries do to entice academic research organizations within their counties? That's a great question.
So we work with both San Diego State, UCSD, and Harder & Company as a local evaluation company. We also have technical assistance support from the Children's Bureau. I don't know your community, but I would say that we didn't ask academic institutions for help, so they didn't help us. But as soon as we reached out and asked, they were so happy and grateful. So I don't know that that's a helpful answer, but that's kind of what happened here. I think you asked another, frontier counties. Oh, I see. So sort of like farther out. I would just say, I think that like so much work is happening remotely. I think there's probably lots of opportunities to engage with large academic institutions.
There's also a question about your early childhood mental health funding. I'm just wondering where you're funding, or how you're funding that, I should say.
Yes. So it's a hodgepodge. We are piecemealing together, which is not sustainable. For a long time, we were funded through our first 5 through our healthy development services, but it didn't actually, it covered behavior support, but it didn't cover early childhood mental health consultation. And we just made it, the timing was right for us to go sort of our separate ways. So we get grant funding. We did have to offer the service as a fee for service for a minute because we just didn't have the funding to sustain it. But it also caused us so much heartburn because of it's an equity issue. So I would just say we are hitting the pavement every day to bring in funding to cover the costs. But that's why we want to pull together this work group, because others are in the same place. And this is an amazing resource that serves early care and education, the K-12 system, behavioral health, first 5. And so I think there's some new opportunity with new funding, Medi-Cal reimbursement. Like I think there's some like legislative things that may be happening. There are some things happening at the state level with early childhood mental health yet, but we're not there yet like other states are. So, we're just trying to hold it together so we can build a sustainable system is my answer. So if anybody has any tips, please send them to me.
Thank you for that transparency. Sometimes it's about being creative. Someone just asked if CASA was a partner in your work.
Yeah, so I would say they are a partner, not in our advisory committee, but I sit on our Child and Family Strengthening Advisory Board, which is our CAPC. So there's cross-pollination. So I would say, yes, we're partnering for sure. But like, again, it's not necessarily like on our partner list, right? Does that make sense?
Great. Well, thank you. Excuse me. Unfortunately, we are going to close out our day, but we appreciate all of the questions. I'm pretty sure we got to all of them, but the feedback in the chat has just been really amazing. Lots of great feedback and the wonderful work you're doing. in San Diego, and you represented your team so well, Amy. I love the passion and the excitement you always bring, and we felt that today, and it was such a wonderful representation of the message that Alex gave to us earlier. So this was a great concrete example of what we would love systems to start to become. So thank you. Now I'm going to pass it to Troy Nichols from Strategies Technical Assistance to close us out for the day.
Amy, I need some of that energy over here. I think it was phenomenal presentation, but your energy behind it is so much important in the work that we do. It's hard work, right? It's not easy work that we do. So to have passion and to be dedicated to it is a huge piece. So to close us out, first thing I'm going to do is pop in the chat our evaluation. So please take a moment to fill out our evaluation. It truly helps us to give information back to you and to synthesize information that we receive. For those of you who are, and hopefully all of you are registered for tomorrow, just a little preview of what that's going to look like. Both new and existing county teams will be participating in the day's events. We do begin at 8:30, where we'll have a welcome. There'll be presentations on FFPSA and the program block grant. So a little more depth of information there. Then we're going to have the Sacramento County Prevention Planning Journey. Sheila Boxley and Michelle Callejas, I hope I pronounced that right, will talk to us about this journey that we've been on and some of the history and some of the places we need to go. Paul Collier is going to talk about the data playbook. Any of you who have not seen that, it's a tool that's really going to help advance our work around data collection, how we engage communities, how we go about doing this work from a data perspective, and how we use data to tell that story. One of the most important aspects of the day that many have asked for is we're going to have regional breakout groups. We're going to break out into the particular region that you are from and have some conversations about this work. Purpose is to provide an opportunity for county teams to connect by region, to build that regional rapport and increase peer sharing. So peer sharing is something we've talked quite a bit about, and we're going to divide into the regions that you saw on that map originally today: the Central Valley, Northern California, the Mountain Valley, Southern California, and then the Bay Area. And we have quite a few questions that should be in your registration. You'll get an email. The questions are going to start framing the work that we do, sharing some of the information that we've obtained and obtaining new information to help us on this journey. Wonderful day, a lot of energy, a lot of information. Know that this is recorded, so hopefully you took some notes on places that you want to go back and gather some of that information and review it. So without further ado, if there's nothing else, I appreciate all of you showing up, being here, and hopefully I will see you for the next 2 days as well. Thank you so much, and greetings and salutations on the way out.